Hi, everybody. My name's Mark. I'm wondering if you could just send a couple of comments up just to say hi and to confirm that you can all see me. So I know I'm doing everything right this end, thus far anyway. Go on the assumption that everything is okay. As I said, my name is Mark. I've been a teacher a little while now. I work largely as a teacher trainer nowadays. I was a director of studies in the past, and I work also for the Ministry of Defence for the UK quite a lot as well. And I've taught people, at a rough estimate, I think we reckoned a little while back about 3/4 of the non-English speaking nations of the world I have managed to teach at some time or other. To what degree, what level is another matter entirely. So, as you are aware, this is going to be a webinar about grammar. One other thing, by the way, it's very nice of you to all do so. Please carry on just saying hi and where you are from as well. It's very interesting for me as well to see. So, hi to South Africa, Texas, Antigua and Barbados, Portugal, Grenada. Brilliant. Lovely to see you. Lovely to know you're all out there anyway. Okay, so this is going to be just a brief introduction to grammar. Can I just make sure I can move these slides on? Yes, I can. Okay, and the briefest of introductions to the introduction to grammar. Grammar is the way that language is organized. I think that's a good way of starting it. There's a couple of ways of looking at grammar, but I think probably the best one to do from the point of view of being a teacher is to think of it not as something completely specific and therefore distinct from lexis or vocabulary, both of which terms we'll have a look at in a second, but to think of it as part of a continuum. And that continuum is largely, you think of the basis of vocabulary. Now, vocabulary is the simple word that we all use, and vocabulary very simply means one word, one word. Furry, 4 legs, goes woof, is a dog. But of course, you don't have to go very far into English before you understand that English is rather constructed of groups of words instead. And of course, that can be phrasal verbs, the very common one. It can be idioms, phrases, sayings, anything you like. It can be so many different things. And therefore, it comes at that point when we talk about teaching English in chunks, it becomes lexis. When those chunks become formalized, and when you can then change around elements within them, which is your lexis and your vocab after all, then that formalized patterned part becomes the grammar. So it's easy to think of them as being as part of a continuum rather than as something distinct, because it also has an effect on the way that you will teach it as well. One of the first things to consider when you are confronted with any grammar point for the first time, and frankly the second, third and fourth time as well, is what you already know. The more you teach it, of course, what you know will change, but as any teacher will tell you, you don't just teach it once and suddenly know everything. It doesn't stick in the same way. Once you've taught it a few times, it becomes pretty much conceptualized, and it's fixed in there and it doesn't go, which is rather useful as well. But certainly it takes time when you are when you're new at this. And there's two things. And again, looking at where people are from here, I'm guessing that a good number of you are native speakers and quite a few of you are not. It means, of course, you've learned in different ways. You already, if you're a native speaker, you know the language, but you know the language in the sense of using it. You don't understand its actual patterns, its organization. You don't understand the why. I know when I did the CELTA back in the early 90s, blimey, remember thinking that I was astonished at what. Hang on, this is the present perfect is different to the past. How is it different? Oh, that's how it's different. And I found it really interesting. Possibly part of the reason for my continued presence in the industry. And so I think that's a great thing to do. Of course, if you come from the other side, if you're not a native speaker, of course you have learned it in a very different way, and you probably learned what we call the procedural. In other words, how to use it before you actually learned to use it. And this will differ vastly depending on your language system, your educational language system, and of course your teacher as well. I've had many teachers many students who could tell me stuff about the grammar, but they couldn't ask for a cup of coffee. And you're thinking, well, what was the point of that? On the other hand, some people are extremely fluent, but they're not applying the grammar. Important point for grammar with that as well is that if you got the Lexis, you don't always use the grammar. If you point at something and go coffee, people tend to know what you need. So the first thing to consider is what you already know. The second thing is whether you've already learnt it, as I say, in the procedural sense, and we'll look at the difference in a while, or whether you've learnt it instinctively because you've acquired it as part of your own language. You don't expect to know everything. And that is actually okay, because I think part of the process of doing this is part of what really helps you to be an effective teacher of it as well. So you're always going to need to think about what you know, and you're going to think about that as you teach the class, and you're going to have to think about it beforehand, and you're going to have to think about, once you know it very well, as you will in time, you also need to think about how much of your knowledge you're actually going to need to reveal to the class as well. And we're going to look at a couple of examples today, and you'll see how you have to modify them very much based on the level of your class, because grammar is a fascinating and a vast topic, and one that even after 30 years, I don't know. I would still love to know. I'd love to know more, but you still have to think, okay, how much of this do I need to reveal given a particular class? Right, we're going to jump through the next couple of slides. The grammar point we're looking at is always called the target language. This will come up a lot. I don't know how far, obviously, you are respectively through your courses, but the target language comes up a great deal. Also, frequently just reduced to TL in capitals. Also a useful one. Okay, so, and here let's talk about our target language being the future simple. Those of you who are doing level 5, of course, will know that assignment B uses the future simple because it is the dreaded first conditional. So you probably have some idea about this. And we're going to look at the 3 aspects of this: meaning, form, phonology. Meaning, again, if you're a native speaker, you know meaning. You don't know, you know meaning, but you know meaning. Form. So in this case, what's that going to constitute for the future simple? Who actually uses it? The subject, I, he, we, should, they. The modal verb, will, and the verb. But what form of the verb? Very important that you decide on the form of the verb. In this case, of course, the infinitive without to. And lastly, the phonology. Now, phonology, I have to admit, is not the word I would agree with here. Phonology is the study of it. You need how they say it, i.e. the pronunciation. And when you think about the phonology, you need, or as I prefer the pronunciation, you need to think not just about the actual phonemes. You have to think about the contraction. So I will. Are you going to teach I will from the start? I would not. Some teachers, I say some trainee teachers, I'd stress, would prefer to say, oh yeah, I'm going to teach I will, da da da, and then I'll teach the I'll, the contraction, later. I would strongly suggest you don't do that. If they're going to use this from the start, they need to know it from the start. It is not I will is formal and I'll is informal. That's not the case. Written yes, spoken, no. So therefore, you teach the contraction early on. You need to teach the stress. Not as easy as you might think. What's the difference between I will go to the shops, I will go to the shops, I will go to the shops? And think about the differences between those three. I, not you, will go to the shops. I will go to the shops. And you are wrong to say that I'm not going to go to the shops. I will go to the shops and not the cinema. So there's big distinctions between the way that you stress things, and these things need to be understood by the students as well. So we've got the form, phonology, and above all, the meaning. And here are the three as I've just taken you through. Okay, just let you have a quick look at that. Okay, and now we come to what I think is, not what I think actually, to be fair, what I know is the biggest single issue that that confronts trainee language teachers: eliciting. Now, this comes up so much because maybe it's because of what you're familiar with, or sometimes it's just what the easiest way out is. If you confront a piece of language for the first time, what is the easiest way to present it to the students? Just give it to them. So, good morning, class. Last week, what did you do? Last weekend, what did you do? Great, you did this, you did that, you did the other. Oh, surprise, surprise, you did past simple last week. Next week, I will do. Right, that's fine. Maybe some of them will understand it. Maybe even most of them will understand it, but they haven't worked it out for themselves. You've given it to them. And so their whole involvement with what they've done, with their engagement with what they've done, is so much less because of that. And so what you need to do instead is to elicit. So the simple one about this would be, say, today I am at school. Tomorrow I at school. Okay, so they've got two gaps to fill in there. Now that's the simplest possible form of eliciting that you could get. But it's really important. It hands it out to them. Why is that important? So many different reasons. It gives them a reason to pay attention. It gives them a reason to know that they have to pay attention, because they can't just look it up in the book later. They know that they might get pointed at and they're going to get asked a question. It engages them. It gives them responsibility for their own learning. It's so important that you do this. And by and large, in your assignments, and this goes both for the L3A, which is past continuous, and the L5B, the first conditional. If you don't do this, if you make no attempt at doing this whatsoever, the likelihood is you're going to have to go back and do it again. Because if all you're ever going to do is write it up on the board, say future simple, I will plus infinitive, that's fine. You're not a teacher at that time. You're a book with legs and arms. And it's not what's needed. Modern teaching is you involve them, they get to work it out. Now, there are limits to this, of course. And the limits are that if nobody knows something, absolutely nobody knows something, then eventually you might have to give it to them. You can only elicit things that people know. But, and this comes again back to being back to beginner. I said that to many of you, if you're not a native English speaker, that you may well find that you remember doing something, but you remember doing something because you remember the rules about it before you remember actually how to use it. If you elicit something, it means that many of your students quite possibly have encountered that language. But that's not the same as knowing it. And this is, I mentioned earlier, you've got the procedural. People frequently know the rules surrounding something, and that's absolutely fine. It's a good place to start. It's the only place to start, but that's not what you are trying to do as a teacher. Okay, you need the rules, but you need the rules in order to make sure that they can follow up and then they can start using it, and it becomes gradually, it becomes part of, you know, it becomes part of their discourse. So they can use it spontaneously, they can use it without any kind of reflection, they can use it accurately, they can use it in the different forms, they can use the question form, or, you know, the negative, or whatever they need to be doing. So they've got a real working knowledge of it, but they've got a working understanding of how to use it as well. And that is so important. So when you elicit, you're eliciting, and even when students are getting it right, they're getting it right possibly because they've got the procedure. It doesn't mean that they are at the place that you would like them to be, either by the end of the lesson or, you know, in time to come. Now, I'm going to just not exactly pause the lesson for a second, but I will mention something that I should have before. If you have any questions, please either write them down straight away. I probably won't answer them till the end, but then at the end, which should be about another 15 minutes, I will do my best to answer them as well. And if possible, I might just sort of stick them up on the board so everybody can see them. So do, as I'm speaking, bear that in mind. And if you've got anything, it doesn't matter if it sounds silly. Trust me, everybody else is probably thinking the same thing as well. So please do ask questions. Okay, so the reasons for eliciting: the engagement of the students, the reason that even if they can answer, even if eliciting, if you like, sounds like if you can elicit it, it doesn't need to be elicited in the first place because they already know it. They do, because they only know it at one level, not the level that you are looking at. But above all else, it means that the students are running the show, and that's what you need to have happening. Okay, we'll just have a quick look here. English grammar, tenses. I kind of like that. English grammar, tenses. Of course, and again, if this was a lesson right now, I'd be asking you, well, what other kinds of grammar are there? Not just these, of course. You've got so many others. Conditionals are obviously a great one to look at as well. Articles, and of course you get that point where, say, lexis and grammar shade into each other. For instance, you've got something like articles, which is the use of a and the. Does that come under lexis? Does that come under grammar? Is it the application of rules, or is it specific? It becomes blended slightly. And of course, as you know, they also have different names for themselves: continuous or progressive, simple past, or the past simple. Just to be clear about this, for each tense, you've got not the present. For each tense, you've got the simple, you've got the continuous. Is that clear? I hope so. You've got the continuous, you've got the perfect, and you've got the perfect continuous. So those are your four for each one. Okay. Oh, another one I would also have a think about as well is parts of speech. Again, another one where lexis, vocabulary blend into it. So the difference between, say, expressive and expression. That's just a basic example of, you know, between the adjective and the noun. So different parts of speech, or different words that take different parts of speech. Also, where does that come on that particular continuum? Okay. Let's just click on here. So, how to approach teaching tenses, researching and know the MFP. If you haven't already done your grammar assignment, I cannot stress, and again, I speak as a marker frequently to be found with his head in his hands. I cannot stress enough that you need to research these. It's the first thing you need to do. I do encounter a great number of students, trainees, who think that they know it. Of course, they know it instinctively, but they clearly don't know it in the depth that you would be required to actually teach it. Very simple ones that come up, for instance, with this is the distinction between the first and the second conditional. And sometimes people teach the first conditional, and then when it comes to the controlled or the free practice, they start on the second conditional and they haven't noticed the difference. And suddenly, for instance, a very common one that is used as well there is, what would you do if you won the lottery? Or even, and this happens quite often as well, probably giving you more secrets than I should here, but listen up. If I win the lottery, I will. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't really work, does it? Because what's the future simple? The future simple is, of course, based on the idea of a likely event. And so when it comes to the second point here, establish a context for your lesson. The context that you need for your lesson has to be something that matches the actual language. So that is why you need to research first, because if you research it, then you've got an idea of the context that's required. So, for instance, for the first conditional, if I do this, I will do that. I would therefore think about future plans, because future plans is a good likelihood. And this is something actually I write in my feedback quite often. You've got a good likelihood of something to happen. So talk about future plans, talk about the weekend, some of that. What's a high probability? Say the weather. And so great, at this point, you can start thinking about, okay, well, if this happens, then this will happen, you know, and so on and so forth. Therefore, you've got a specific context. And we always use the context to elicit the example of the target language. It gets people thinking immediately, gets them into the zone about, okay, right, why do I need this? And the whole idea of using the context is, well, it's two things. The first is it gets them thinking about it. Sometimes it, well, not sometimes, it would always create a need for them to do something, even if they don't know that they have the need to do this in the first place. They're trying to find the language. They're trying to find the language. They don't have the language. That's the gap that you, as a teacher, are filling in with this particular piece of language. So that piece of language that you're teaching needs to actually do this in the first place. Simple one, obviously, for the future. You want to talk about next weekend. You want to get them talking about next week. They don't know how to do that. So what do? You're bringing in the language, I will plus infinitive that allows them to do this. The second reason you have the context is because it also allows you to bring in lexis as well. Because you don't, and I hope this is becoming clear here, you don't just teach grammar in isolation. If you teach grammar in isolation of anything else, then you are back to the good morning class, look on the board, the present perfect. It is used in 1, 2, 3 situations. You need the context, and the context brings in language as well. So if we go back to I will, assuming that you're teaching I will, we can make a judgment call probably about the level of the class that you're teaching, which is going to be not very high. It's going to be probably low to mid elementary. That being the case, what could you talk about? You could talk about, okay, let's go with next weekend again. And in the end, you might have 6 different things that they're going to do. And that's 6 different ideas. I will play football. So you've got a nice collocation there. I'll play sport. A good collocation to have between play and a sport. I will go to the movies, go to the shops. So you got go to already. That's another great one, isn't it? Go plus preposition to, and you build up. So you've got maybe 6 of these. They are possibly interchangeable in some ways, because go to plus a variety of different places, but they've got the collocation. So you're building up their lexis at the same time that they're getting the grammar. Eliciting, as we said, meaning, form, as I've mentioned, and phonology that I've also mentioned. In other words, the contractions, the stress in particular, and the intonation as well. Intonation, by the way, is the rise and the fall of the voice. In a simple sentence like I will go to the shops, it's just going to go down at the end. I will go to the shops. That's all you'd need for that. When it comes to conditionals, it's a little bit more complex, but nothing too terrible. Okay, so I hope we've established one thing there, which is you need a context, and that context will get them thinking about it, and it will also allow you to introduce a lexical element as well, a subject. And also CCQs, concept checking questions. These do one particular thing. They help you to make sure that the students understand what you have been teaching. So we asked them after we presented the new language, there's things that you need to check with this. Remember to check the time reference and the state of the action. So what does that mean? You know, I will. You can just use your finger. I will. Is that right? I will. I will. Or I will. Which one is actually going to work for that? Which one do they think is correct? Gestures are fantastic for things like CCQs, and especially as you'll find that you develop your own language. It's a fairly common language, but you develop your own language with your own class anyway. They know what you mean with, you know, when you're doing this, that, or the other with your hands. You can use it for, is it general? Is it in progress? Another perfect one that you can use here. And that last one, don't rush it, take your time, is really, really a good one to do. If it's not working, take it slower and then go back over it if you need to. It's also a great point for preparation as well. One thing that I see, not so much now with working online, but when I was a director of studies and I spent a lot of time in classrooms watching other teachers. And one thing that really, really struck me all the time was sometimes people had not prepared this particular point. And that point is the presentation, and specifically within that, the CCQs. And the reason why they need prep, you can't prepare every single word of a class. It would be boring as anything if you could, and no two classes you teach will ever be the same. One of the great things about teaching is that fact. But there are some particular points in a class that you will need to prepare, and prepare maybe not down to the word, but pretty closely. And one of them is your concept checking questions. Because if you find that you get your concept checking questions wrong, if they don't actually address what they need to within that, then you find yourself asking more concept checking questions. Then, of course, you find that you're not using the simple language because you haven't prepared it well enough. You're not using really simple language. So no longer are you within the student's comfort zone, because the language that you use to ask the questions should be really simple, so that they're thinking about the target language, not thinking about what you've actually said in the first place. And so what often happens is that teachers ask slightly more complex questions. They're using a little bit more, okay, what I'm trying to say is, and it's getting a bit further, and you can just see a teacher drowning when they're doing this. So it's such a great thing to make sure you prepare various points. And one of them is obviously points in the presentation, timelines and such like, and the questions you're going to ask, and then the concept checking as well. What's the simple points there that they need to all get over? Something else, and it often happens with this as well, it's linked to this, is when you get one person answering. Another great thing about, first of all, elicitation, and secondly, with concept checking, is you can spread the load. So you're not just getting your one bright spark who's seen it, it's probably got a pretty good working knowledge of the grammar. You're not doing that anymore. In fact, you're making sure that everybody is getting a fair bit of this. Everybody knows that they might be asked at some point or other. And they might, you know, at this point, everybody knows they're going to hear it. Everybody has a reason to contribute. Everybody has a reason to pay attention. They can't just sit back and rely on that one person, because you ask a concept checking question, the same person puts up their hand, the same person answers correctly. Oh, great, right, somebody's going to give me the right answer, let's move on. No, the idea about this is you make sure that no one is left behind. Okay, next one we'll go on to is the practice activities. There is a huge difference between these, of course, the controlled practice and the free practice. You're really looking at two such distinct things here. The first one, obviously testing accuracy, a gap fill exercise. Now, a gap fill exercise is pretty difficult for something like just asking for the future simple or will, because what you're going to do, you're going to just give them lots of sentences and they've got to put will in there. So what you could do with it, something like this, is to develop it slightly by doing some questions. So, sorry, doing some pictures. And they're going some pictures, and then you've got the second half of the sentence, and each sentence has to match that particular picture. So then they can start putting them in. And of course, that also allows you to change things like the subject, you know, he, she, they, I, etc. will. The freer practice, you need to think of a context as well. What's the context? Again, for future, what would you do? Talk to each other about your plans for next weekend. Great, done it. If that's simple enough for your fast finishers, okay, talk about what they're going to do in the holidays. Your faster finishers still, what they're going to do when they finish school, what they're going to study at university. Of course, you will not use going to, because that's part of your language knowledge, that you understand that there's also going to, there's present continuous, and there's present simple, timetable, future. They've got all these different futures that they can also use. You're not revealing those for the moment. You're sticking with will, and those ones will very much wait for another day. So you need to think about a context that will give you a freer practice that will allow them to express themselves more widely, and also back up exercises for that. Spoken exercise, nothing that you need to commit to paper. Spoken exercises for the guys who are finding it easier, allowing you more time to sit down and listen and to work with the people who are struggling a little bit more. Always a great thing to do. Remember, you're trying to make sure that everybody gets through. You're not simply taking the strongest answers and taking them and assuming that that's a benchmark of the level of the whole class. It is not the case. Okay. Sorry, as we mentioned here, syntax, word order, adjectives and nouns and adjectives. So that's actually, again, the order rather than simply talking about parts of speech. Countable and uncountables, modal verbs, to which you could also add, say, conjunctions and things like that. So the difference between if, unless, as soon as, or any number of those. Conditionals, which I've probably spoken about too much in terms of level 5, assignment B, but there are plenty of them. Anyway, we'll move on from those for the moment. And how to avoid getting overwhelmed. Point 1 here, the first bullet point, is very much a question of preparation. You find that if you don't prepare effectively, then you find yourself bringing in points from other things that they may not have done. You tend to call on reinforcements, things that they may not understand. On the other hand, if you do have the time to prepare effectively, then you can often use points from previous lessons and actually bring them in. So there's an effective form of recycling here. And you'll also find that a good course book will do the same as well. Accepting that you'll learn it as you teach. Trust me, any new teacher, by new teacher, I mean, 2 or 3 years in, will spend time in a grammar class thinking, please don't ask me that question. Please don't ask me that question because I don't know. If you do get asked the question that you don't know, far, far better to front up. It's not ideal, but better to front up than to fudge and to pretend that you know it and then not to give an effective answer. They can sniff that stuff out, trust me. So just say, sorry, let me have a look at that. But also, if you say you're going to look at it, do look at it and come back and give them that effective response the next day. Take your own notes, because those notes, the same as material preparation as you're already finding with the lessons that you're making for your assignments for the moment. Notes, it's the same as materials. They always get used. They never get wasted. The correct terminology. Now, today I've given you Lexis and vocab along with grammar, and also TL, the target language. Playing the long game. Now, this isn't really explained here, but I think it's such a worthwhile one to point out. You are not going to teach anything in terms of grammar and find that they go from people who didn't know a thing about that particular point to becoming fluent speakers when they walk out of the class. It does not work like that. That's why we use recycling. That's why they come back and do it again. So don't try to tailor your aims to that rather than saying students will be fluent in various that doesn't work. All you can really do is move people along the continuum. Something that is very much the case with most modern students, that certainly wasn't the case when I was a young teacher, is that because of the internet, you'll find that people have far more varying ideas of a particular grammar, or indeed lexical point. It's very rare nowadays to find things that nobody knows at all, unless you're teaching an advanced class and you're talking about some fairly arcane bits of lexis. Therefore, they're going to know different things, are going to have different levels of it. And what you are trying to do, therefore, is move them from that continuum. The first thing you're trying to do is to get them on the start of the continuum, which is a procedural, they understand the rules, and then both in the lesson and then in subsequent lessons, you're trying to move them across so that they get to the point where, like I say, it becomes spontaneous, it becomes unthinking, it becomes something easy for them, and that becomes part of their existing framework that then they can build on for further grammatical and lexical use as well. The long game is such an important point to make. Okay, questions and answers, of which you've got some there already, so thank you for that, and thank you for watching. Now, what I'm going to do is, if I can find my text here, I'm not even sure I can. Right, I'll do my best to have a look for that anyway, because I'd just like to, oh, of course it's in here. I'm just going to post up that's the SurveyMonkey for you. I'll put that in there now, but we're going to have a quick look. Please start asking questions, but I'll start with the one. Thank you, Julia. Would it ever be useful to briefly compare to the learner's L1? Comparing it to English helps me to understand both function and why direct translation doesn't work. They almost seem to be two different things sometimes, don't they? Okay, certainly in terms of, sorry, I'm just collecting my thoughts on this one. Certainly in terms of, if you want to pass, for instance, a level 3 or level 5 teaching qualification, I would not attempt translation. It is certainly not in the language trainers canon, and especially as your marker is unlikely to understand the translation in the first place from the original. So I don't do it in an assignment. That is, I'd say that's pretty much a no-no. In the real world, however, yes, sometimes it definitely works, but very important, I would say, I would use it really only at the level of vocabulary. In other words, a 1-for-1. Sometimes, rather than singing and dancing and you know, trying to explain something, if you got the word bucket, you know, by the time you've actually drawn one and sort of like done a well and sort of just yes, sometimes it is worth it. I would say in general it's not worth it, because you want them to be working, you want that cognitive work to be done to actually understand something in the first place. Even if you go around the houses, it's worth the effort to make the learning more memorable. But yes, every now and then, if people aren't getting it, rather than save yourself 2 minutes, save the class 2 minutes, give them the translation, and then move on and save the time. However, you do mention here as well, Julia, the function as well, and that, I think, is getting trickier. So, for instance, you know, you could do this with a conditional. In some languages, of course, they have, you know, if you're looking at first conditional, yes, they do have if plus present plus future, and some will do if plus future, if I will, if plus future plus future. I would be very, very cagey about that. I would prefer to teach it in its own right in English, and then let them draw the connections themselves afterwards, rather than just putting a one against the other. It's too easy, and I think here, if things are too easy for students, you're not doing them any favors. The learning doesn't stick. Yes, it's more effective at the time, great, but things don't stick in as well. You haven't got them to put in the work, and if they haven't done the work, then you know it's not gonna be as effective later. You're not teaching them just to get to have achieved your aims at the end of the lesson. You're teaching them in order to make sure that they come out with something that's lasting as well. And to make it lasting, you need to start there. And if that means making them put in the work, so be it. Okay, next one. Hi. Thank you, Mike. What if a student wants to know more than they plan for their level or a little bit above their level? Ask some more questions about a particular grammar point. Yeah, you'll find yourself sometimes in the class where you're thinking really snipers would be the best way forward with this one. But if you can hold back sometimes your natural animus towards some clever so-and-so, this comes up for a couple of things. First of all, sometimes that student should be in a higher level class, and that's fine. That needs to be done. You sometimes have a word afterwards. I would often say, yeah, maybe we can talk about that afterwards. And then, of course, you're not actually talking about the grammar point. You're talking about, where do you think you're at? Are you finding the lessons quite easy? Okay, can I put you on the waiting list and move you up a class? Something like that as well. Even send them off to the director of studies, or send them off to a grown-up, let them sort with it. It can be all sorts of things like that. Actually, there on the spot, you make a judgment call, and the judgment call is normally you're going to say, oh, thanks for that. That's a really good point, but that's a bit more than I want to do today. I need to get this. So almost involve them a little bit in the learning and make them understand that, yeah, I need everybody learning this point rather than the whole thing. Again, front up if you possibly can. It's from a point of view of self-preservation, honesty is so much the better policy, rather than pretending something is other than it is. So I don't think it's explanation that you need at this point. You just need honesty, and you need straightforwardness. But you can also make the judgment call if they're asking for more, and the students as a whole are ready for more, and they're simply representing what the students think. Great, go for it. Go off book. And as I said previously, and it's something I probably say in any seminar, your lesson will just never ever be the same from one to another. Even if your preparation materials are absolutely identical, it just never happens. And more power to that fact. So yeah. Go straight up with them. The other thing I would point out about that, and I mentioned it in the free practice, was extra exercise as well. So you're chucking slightly more stuff at them. Very quickly, I mentioned one other thing about this. If anybody's interested, I think it's called deep learning. I could be wrong. Deep learning. Anyway, it's something that started about 2016 with two heavyweights of English language teaching, who are Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill. Scrivener, you very likely have, and I've got it somewhere as well, buried somewhere. You've got his English teaching, and Adrian Underhill wrote Sound. I've forgotten the name. Anyway, the basic phonology. Sound Foundations, of course, Sound Foundations. The two of them got together and did deep learning, and it was a great little movement that was trying to take the power back from the course book a little bit more and give it to the teacher, and to say, okay, you're in charge. This person's finished earlier. This person's a bit stronger. Okay, right. What else can you make them do? How can you really make sure that, again, the thing I said, that you really move from just the procedural, yeah, I know the rules, to really getting to the performative, make them do it differently. So deep learning is something that I would suggest you have a look at. You've probably got other things to worry about at the moment, like getting through your assignments, but it is great. Okay, timelines. Their role. It's such a great idea. As you know, modern TEFL teaching tells you quite a lot about different learning styles, and they're deeply questionable idea, but there's still no doubt that getting people to learn things in different ways and appealing to different strengths is a great idea. A timeline is simply a visual idea of a tense. So you can do something, a very simple one. You can just do present. Okay, so it's here. Future, there. Past, there. And then you can start looking at present perfect. Okay, so present perfect. Okay, you've got the. So I'm not sure which way my hands are going on this one. I'm trying to do it opposite to the way that I would normally do it. So you've got the present. The present perfect can be something that starts in the past that continues up until the present, or the present perfect can be a point in the past, but we don't know exactly when it is. It doesn't have a specific date, or it can be something in the past with an effect on the present. So you can see if you do a timeline, it can really help people, and they can refer back to it as well. So for tenses in particular, it is absolutely great. How can I improve my own grammar? Haven't really thought about that one, to be honest, but I would really very much say the same as I would say to a lot of the more advanced students, which is noticing, awareness raising, constantly be looking at it. Once you've actually learnt the differences between the past simple and the present perfect, then start. You could just be listening to an advertisement and think, okay, why did they use the past why do they use the past simple there? Why do they use the present perfect? Anything like that. Once you start using it, you'll notice it anyway, because you'd notice if they used it wrongly. But you need to start actually making an active effort to saying, okay, why are they using it correctly? Why am I not noticing this? So you have to go out yourself and notice. I would say that's how to improve your own grammar. You simply, once you've learned it, you start looking for instances of it. How can you make grammar more fun and interesting for students? I think a lot of what I've said today would do that. Like I say, the context is vital. You're not lecturing, you're actually talking about something else, and then you use the language to solve that problem, to allow them to express themselves in a way that will resolve whatever requires resolution. So I would say that would be that would most certainly be the thing that works. Obviously, the controlled practice, the free practice, you can make them more competitive if you like, but I would also say controlled and free practice are very much a matter for getting people to work in groups as well. That is also more interesting, but they're working in groups with a problem to overcome, be it a gap fill, be it a role play where they need to achieve some sort of resolution. Just to give you an example of this, maybe for the first conditional, if I see this in anybody's assignment, I shall know you were there. Say for the first conditional, what about something like for a free practice, you could have a role play, and this would work perfectly with, say teenage kids. The son or daughter wishes to borrow their parents' car that weekend, and so you got to have a negotiation. The negotiation is going to be, okay, all right, if I borrow the car, or if I can borrow the car, I will. And then at the end, you can ask, okay, between the pairs, which parent managed to extort, not that you'd use that word, who managed to get the most out of their son or daughter before they agreed to lend them the car, something like that. So then you've got, first of all, they've got the motivation to actually express themselves. They've got the motivation to ask the questions. They're making the promises because there's something they want at the end of it, which is to borrow the car. The parent has got the motivation to try to get as much out of them as they can. And then they've had an enjoyable conversation that they're then very happy to share with everybody else in the class. They've also, within that, they've rehearsed using the target language before they share it with the rest of the class. And that's really important as well. You've actually used the target language 6 or 7 times. And then you feel much better about actually saying, yeah, this is what we talked about. I said, I will, if you, etc. So I would say anything like that. Think about the dynamics as well. That's something that makes things more fun and interesting. And also the elicitation. Like I say, the elicitation keeps everybody on their feet. So everybody on their feet, everybody on the edge of their seat, because they know that it's coming towards them. Okay. Yes, I would advise students, although I'm not saying I know very much about them anymore. When I was when I worked for a language company, I had to go through and pick out various ones that were different for, you know, working on different strengths. That was a while back now. I'm sure they'll all move on. I'd say the language apps are probably the most beneficial, actually, the ones that are specific to the class. So, you know, if you're using Quizlet or Kahoot or something like that, then these are the ones that you can then use to put on your work the points that you want them to revise, and then they can do that. So I'd say that's great. But yes, I think as an extra, then it's brilliant. I think you need to also, and this comes back to a previous point, I think Mike's point, if people use apps, they can often use them to come up with questions, and those questions might not be questions that are actually beneficial to the rest of the class who have got have got their own work, and they've got the curriculum that you're setting. If you find that somebody's just full of questions that they've got off their app, no, that's something different, and that's a student who's very much prioritizing their own journey over that of the class. So I think you've got to be careful with them, and maybe to not stamp down, but to be polite but firm with people who are using them to as a stick to beat you as a teacher with. You've only got so much time, and that time should be shared equally between the class, rather than just being the person who has to deal with somebody's Duolingo addiction. Okay. I like this one. I tend to have this joking, flippant attitude about grammar with students, like we're going to slog through the thing that no one likes. Yeah, I think that can be one way of doing it. Sorry, I know that Andrew, thank you for this. This is linked obviously to making grammar more fun and interesting for students. I would have to say that to a certain extent, if you teach grammar along with a context, and therefore a lexical set, you don't need to worry so much about saying, oh, okay, we've got grammar, boring, because you're not. It's basically, how many of you have got kids? You're cutting up the vegetables nice and small and putting them in. And I think it actually works really, really well. You're actually getting them to resolve problems. You're creating a need for them to express themselves in a way that therefore overcomes the issue that they're being given. And therefore you don't need to apologize or laugh about grammar anymore, because it's just, they've got to get it, but they've got to get it in order to get somewhere. So I think I'm not sure you always need that attitude, although it's not bad. It's not bad to have it every now and then. Okay, so okay, and to be honest, sorry, you probably answered that a bit yourself there, Andrew. If nobody has any further questions, then I will wrap up there. If you do, then please ask them. I'll give you just another 10 seconds to stick anything else on that you want. But thank you very much for that. I hope that's been helpful. I've given you quite a lot of information there. As is normally the case, you're not going to pick everything up. I have gone live on this, so I'm assuming this will be put up so that you can go through it again. If there's anything in specific that I didn't needed a bit of chewing over. Okay, thank you all very much, and best of luck with the rest of your assignments.